On this day in history, September 6th, 1492, Christopher Columbus sails from La Gomera in the Canary Islands, his final port of call before crossing the Atlantic Ocean for the first time. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, going over the history of Columbus's first voyage. The adventurers numbered 88 souls, and on Friday, August 3rd, 1492, at 8 in the morning, the little fleet weighed anchor and stood for the Canary Islands. An abstract of the Admiral's diary made by Las Casas is yet extant, and from it many particulars may be gleaned concerning this first voyage. 3 days after the ships had set sail, the Pinta lost her rudder. The Admiral was in some alarm, but confronted himself with the reflection that Martin Pinzon was energetic and ready-witted. They had, however, to put in at Tenerife to refit the caravel. On September 6th, they weighed anchor once more with all haste, Columbus having been informed that 3 Portuguese caravels were on the lookout to intercept him. On September 13th, the westerly variations of the magnetic needle were, for the first time, observed. On the 15th, a meteor fell into the sea at 4 or 5 leagues distance. Soon after they arrived at those vast plains of seaweed called the Sargasso Sea, while, at the time, writes the Admiral, they had most temperate breezes, the sweetness of the mornings being especially delightful. On the 17th the men began to murmur. They were frightened by the strange phenomena of the variation of the compass, but the explanation Columbus gave restored their tranquillity. On the 18th they saw many birds, and a great ridge of low-lying clouds, and they expected to see land. On the 20th they saw boobies and other birds, and they were sure the land must be near. In this, however, they were disappointed, and thenceforth Columbus, who was keeping all the while a double reckoning, one for the crew and one for himself, had great difficulty in restraining the evil disposed from the excesses they meditated. On the 25th, Martin Alonso Pinzon raised the cry of land, but it proved false, as did the rumor to the same effect on October 7th from the Nina. But on the 11th, the Pinta fished up a cane, a pole, a stick, which appeared to have been wrought with iron, and aboard, while the Nina sighted a branch covered with berries. And with these signs all of them breathed and were glad. On 10 o'clock that night, Columbus perceived and pointed out a light ahead, and at 2 in the morning on Friday, October 12th, 1492, Rodrigo de Triana, a sailor aboard the Nina, announced the appearance of what proved to be the New World. The land sighted was an island, called by the Indians Guanahani, and named by Columbus San Salvador. It is generally identified with Watling Island. The same morning Columbus landed, richly clad, and bearing the royal banner of Spain. He was accompanied by the brothers Pinzon, bearing banners of the Green Cross, a device of the admirals, and by a great part of the crew. When they had all given thanks to God, kneeling upon the shore, and kissed the ground with tears of joy for the great mercy received, the Admiral named the island, and took solemn possession of it for their Catholic Majesties of Castile and Leon. At the same time, such of the crews as had shown themselves doubtful and mutinous sought his pardon weeping, and prostrated themselves at his feet. The voyage resulted in the discovery of the islands of Santa Maria de la Concepcion, Rum Cay, Fernandina, Long Island, Isabella, Crooked Island, Cuba or Juana, named by Columbus in honor of the young Prince of Spain, and Hispaniola, Haiti, and San Domingo. Off the last of these, the Santa Maria went aground, owing to the carelessness of the steersman. No lives were lost, but the ship had to be unloaded and abandoned, and Columbus, who was anxious to return to Europe with the news of his achievement, resolved to plant a colony on the island, to build a fort of the materials of the stranded hulk, and to leave the crew. The fort was called La Navidad. 44 Europeans were placed in charge. On January 4th, 1493, Columbus, who had lost sight of Martin Pinzon, set sail alone in the Nina for the east, and 2 days afterwards, the Pinta joined her sister ship. A storm separated the vessels, and Columbus did not reach the island of Santa Maria in the Azores until February 18th. He was threatened with capture by the Portuguese governor, who could not for some time be brought to recognize his commission. On February 24th, however, he was allowed to proceed, and on March 4th, the Nina dropped anchor off Lisbon. The King of Portugal received the admiral with the highest honors. On March 13th, the Nina put out from the Tagus, and 2 days afterwards, Friday the 15th, she reached Palos. The court was at Barcelona, and thither Columbus proceeded. He entered the city in a sort of triumphal procession, was received by their majesties in full court, and seated in their presence, related the story of his wanderings, exhibited the rich and strange spoils of the new-found lands, the gold, the cotton, the parrots, the curious arms, the mysterious plants, the unknown birds and beasts, and the Indians he had brought with him for baptism. All his honors and privileges were confirmed to him. The title of Don was conferred on himself and his brothers. He rode at the king's bridle. He was served and saluted as a grandee of Spain. A new and magnificent scutcheon was also blazoned for him, May 4th, 1493, whereon the royal castle and lion of Castile and Leon were combined with the 5 anchors of his own coat of arms. On May 3rd to 4th, Alexander VI granted bulls confirming to the crowns of Castile and Leon all the lands discovered, or to be discovered, west of the line of demarcation drawn 100 leagues west of the Azores, on the same terms as those on which the Portuguese held their colonies along the African coast. A new expedition was got ready to secure and extend the discoveries already made.